Okay, guys, welcome. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to everybody for waiting in the chat as well. We are live today. I'm happy to actually bring back to the show. Both of these guys have already been on the show before. So it's quite a pleasure to have them back on the show. Mohal Joshi and Kishor Narayan have actually started a new show of their own. It is called India Rising, and it's going to be talking about foreign policy and foreign affairs. So I really want to discuss this with them because this is something that I'm interested in, but I don't necessarily know a lot about it. So first and foremost, welcome to the show, Kishore and Mohal.
Thank you, Sham,
Thank you,
for
Sham.
inviting
It's
us.
nice to it's nice to be back with you.
Definitely. So first and foremost, why foreign affairs? And it's an interesting one because number one, let me kind of answer that myself a little bit, but I want to get to you too. Is because there aren't a lot of podcasts, maybe, or social media accounts that are necessarily focusing on foreign affairs. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There are like very few and far between. Maybe you can count it on, I mean, a couple at most. So, see, the reason we started this podcast is like I got along with Kishore, and like I said that, like today, like there are a lot of misconceptions about foreign policy. A lot of the news, I mean, as with any news, including that with foreign policy, it's like it has a slant in the news and it's all clear towards the clickbait headlines that okay, this happened, but there is no deep understanding of how foreign policy works and what are the strategic implications of it.
Okay. So, Kishore, you wanna get a word in?
Yeah, basically what Mohal was answering, but we have a tendency to look at news items in isolation. Rather, what we should actually be doing and what the media outlets or the analysis websites need to be doing is to find a pattern in all this and
Hmm.
try to give out a more nuanced picture of where we are headed or where we should be heading, rather than try to sensationalize something either due to some events happening outside India on which India may not have complete control, or on things that are happening within India, which again may not necessarily be connected to foreign policy. So I think that was the kind of understanding with which me and Mohal we decided that we need to come up with a far more balanced, nuanced, and a more common man kind of a setting where we kind of explain to the common man what happens. Because even though there are a few or very limited podcasts of this type, they don't cater to the common man in the street. Unlike a chat show that you would have explaining Indian politics 101, you won't have an Indian foreign policy 101 kind of a podcast which would explain to the common man the rationale behind whatever is happening. So that was where we thought we could actually bring in our knowledge and also learn along the way.
Yeah, I
Definitely.
mean, like
Sorry,
there
go
are a
ahead.
lot of like nowadays what happens is like you pick up one headline and maybe there are some headlines which will create outrage and heartburn throughout all the p folks, but what people don't understand is like statecraft like is a nuanced thing. It's not like it like the event cannot be seen in isolation. You need to see a pattern over a period of time. Now there's not sometimes a strategic patience to see like how the whole trend is going, but they'll pick up a singular event and maybe try to get more clicks or create more outrage, and that's how it gets lost. So we wanted to have this podcast to cut through this dense fog of like misconception or slant or bias in the news to give the accurate picture on the ground, like what's happening actually with the foreign policy. For as just Kishore mentioned, explain it in a low level, simple way for the common man.
Right. So let me ask you something before I get to my other question that I was going to ask you. Let me ask you something. Do you think that there is a space for currently for sort of nuanced, balanced even-handed conversations and even-handed shows, because what you see these days is, sadly, you see a situation. Well, I don't know if this is unfortunate or if this is just a symptom of today, but you see so many, the things that get popular, or the things that get traction, are the things that are like more screamy, more shouty, more sort of finger pointing,
Yeah,
more abusing, more oh, these people are the most horrible people, and this, end of the world, apocalypse kind of scenario.
yeah.
Do you think that kind of stuff is always going to be the case, or do you think there is a place for nuanced, balanced conversations? So I'll let Kishore take this one first.
Yeah.
Okay. Simple answer. I think in the Indian domestic political scene, that is how things have. That those are the depths to which Indian domestic political discussion has fallen down to. But luckily for the global diplomacy, global affairs discussions, luckily I think those depths have not been touched. And touch wood, and we hope we never get to
I
those.
think, Kishore,
But
you need to visit the US to see how it is here.
but
Yeah,
then
that's
but
true.
then more than me, I wouldn't want anybody in South Block to come and see what's happening there. But then, yeah, on a more serious note, irrespective of all the finger pointing that keeps happening between India and any other country, which in itself is actually quite a rare thing. India is always measured in its words when it comes to Ministry of External Affairs statements, the official statements. So I think even behind the closed doors, when they have detailed discussion with other countries, the gentlemanly vocabulary and the mannerisms are
Mm-hmm.
all still maintained. So that actually helps us in cutting through all the banner headlines that we see 2 days prior to any event happening, or even 1 or 2 days after the event happened. So that way, I think what we get to hear from the horse's mouth is actually quite good enough for us. So that was the good starting point from where we kind of begin to analyze. And at the same point, even in the analyst circuit, foreign policy discussions are luckily still not as guttery as the Indian domestic politics. So
Right.
yeah, I think we are still in good company.
Okay, so let me ask you guys this now. I'll start with Mohal, and then I'll come to Kishore. So let me ask you guys this: what would you say has been the current government's performance on foreign policy, if you had to give it a score out of 10? And also, I'd like to know reasons as to why.
I would give it, let's say, a 7. I mean, it's not like awesome, but also it's not like terrible as people say. It's pretty good, you know. So, like I mentioned in my article like a few months ago, like the main two challenges I see is like Nepal and Maldives, where the current governments have gone against. Like now, Maldives, because we had elections and the new guy is supposed to be not as pro China as the previous president Yamin. So maybe there might be some kind of redemption for the government, because I know there were a lot of people who wanted a military intervention when
Hmm.
he imposed emergency and stuff. And at least India kept a level headed and saw it out, and we use other levers of statecraft. See, this is the problem with like statecraft. It's a very nuanced art. Like, so in many people's imagination, like you might be thinking like a Bollywood hero, like going across the border, thumping his chest and like killing like all the terrorists in a brazen manner. It doesn't happen like that. Statecraft is not that. It's a very slow and methodical process behind the scenes. So that, and also Nepal. So in Nepal, like the prime minister Oli, like the communist coalition has come to power, and they have been like snubbing India's nose and slowly drifting towards China. So which is like a, we can discuss later on, like the strategic drift towards China in many of the neighborhood countries. But the re-engagement with the rest of the world which was pretty lackadaisical in like the previous government. So that has been a positive, that the Modi government has tried to re-engage with the world on a serious level, you know.
All right, Kishore, how about you? What score would you give?
I think I would go along with Mohal on this, probably upper 6.5, closer to 7. But then I give that for a different reason.
Mm-hmm.
I give that simply for the manner in which India has conducted itself at the high table. As I was talking to you before we went live, India had been reluctant to be part of the high table all along. And since we were not even part of the high table, we were not even invited to those discussions and parties earlier. We would end up being on the menu. I mean, that's the phrase that is often used in Washington D.C. and New York. If you're not invited to the party, then you're actually on the menu.
Right.
So India would end up being on the menu whether India liked it or not. Now slowly we are part of the invitees. We are one among the invitees. So we get to hear what they think. We get to tell what we think about an issue. For example, Afghanistan, and how India perceives the current situation in Afghanistan, or even a simple uh, stuff like International Solar Alliance, where I mean, all along India didn't even have a habit of attending these.
Mm.
So, for, I mean, whether you had the right shoes or not, you had to get along a new pair of shoes. You had to polish them, and now you had to wear them and go to the party. So that in itself was a big learning
Mm.
for the Indian bureaucracy, for the Indian babus out there. And bear in mind that most of the work, 80-85% of the work, is done not by Minister of External Affairs, or by the Prime Minister himself, if he or she is very much interested in foreign policy. Most of the work, rather, is done by the Foreign Secretary and levels below him. So, with that in mind, that is where India had to actually pull up its socks and be counted. So, for that reason alone, I give the current government's performance higher 6.5 to 7.
Okay, and I remember this was this thing that used to be brought up by the opposition and people that didn't like the either Modi or the Modi government. They used to say all the time that, "Oh, all the prime minister does is take trips, and he spends all this taxpayer money on taking foreign trips and all of that stuff." Do you think that the result of those trips has been overall sort of positive? Because in my experience and in what I've seen is, I've seen the relationship that India has been able to build with certain countries, which either generally speaking ignored us, or sort of had a relationship with us on a very nominal level, with whom we've been able to engage in a slightly more significant way over the past 4 years. Do you guys see a little bit of that? What was your guys' sort of experience, or what did you guys see with that, all those trips that he took?
Yeah, so the thing is that it's easy to outrage over those glitzy Madison Square Garden or Wembley events, but they don't understand, like many people, that like the India's image in the world is being improved in the standing in the world. That's a kind of like what we call in foreign policy like soft power. So like soft power has increased. India in he's reaching out to the diaspora across the world, so that when issues pertaining to India come up in their parliaments or like with the president, you can have a vociferous Indian diaspora lobby to show that why either you need to build a deeper relationship with India, or that why maybe a measure which would be perceived as being against India could be not taken. So that would help a lot. So that re-engagement with the world, like I mean, cutting across like political, I mean, foreign policy commentators, whether they have any biases or whether they are pro Modi or anti Modi, everybody can't disagree on the fact that there has been a re-engagement with the world, which was kind of not happening with the previous dispensation in New Delhi.
Okay, Kishore, how about yourself?
Yeah, basically, yes. Again, we need to look at stuff beyond the glitzy glamour and all the again banner headlines that we keep hearing about day in and day out.
Hmm.
But then do remember that it is these kind of discussions that happen at the highest level, which actually helped India to prevail on Saudi to stop bombarding the Yemeni port,
Hmm.
which in turn helped us to take our ships into the Gulf of Aden and get our Indian diaspora out from the port. So the and again, India was the only country which kind of managed to do it from a godforsaken tough situation out
Yeah.
there, and that actually convinced quite a few non-resident Indians. I would count you also along those lines. But from the other Indians that I keep talking about elsewhere also, who keep listening to these kind of headlines, where they finally kind of get a sense of attachment to their central government in Delhi, irrespective of
Hmm.
where they live. Even if you are living in a Fiji or a Tonga or a Australia or even a South Africa, you know that your government is actually concerned simply because you carry an Indian passport. And when you carry an Indian passport in an alien country, and if the dispensation there is either not functional at all or is alien to you or to your government, you know that your government will bet its last rupee to get you out of any unsafe situation. So these are the subtle actions on the ground, more than the words that we were hearing all along the first 2.5 3 years. The words obviously got more publicity, like the Madison Square Garden and the Wembley and stuff like that. But these are the smaller deeds which ended up becoming more invaluable, which actually gave a sense of pride to every Indian living outside. And whenever I talk to such people around, they really get a sense of the kind of work that the current dispensation is doing. And they kind of realize that, yes, all along we were kind of not sure how to interact with a person in New Delhi, but at least now we know that any help we need, and MEA is there to help us.
Yeah, it's
So
a
yeah, those are the subtle things which we need to actually look at.
it's an interesting one, right? Because you see people that live, people that are from the United States that go outside, and if they're just by the fact that they're holding a United States passport in a foreign country, they know that if something goes wrong, if something goes down, their government is going to fight tooth and nail to help them with however they
Exactly.
can. The same thing with Israel and those countries. It's part of that sort of soft power structure as well. Is that you see that American passport and you're like, I know that their government is going to pull out all the stops to help them no matter what. So
Yes.
that's a very empowering feeling if you're an American citizen. And if you're going anywhere in the world, that's a very empowering feeling. Or and I feel like that's something that a country like India that wants to, join the sort of elite countries of the world, that's a very basic thing to be able to offer your citizens, that hey, look, don't worry, you're an Indian citizen, we'll take care of you, don't worry about it. That's such a basic thing as well. And I want to come to soft power a little later, but I want to sort of start with India's foreign policy performance and India's foreign policy sort of opportunities in around the world. So let's start with the immediate neighbors and then kind of spread out. So let's start with, let's say, Mohal was talking about, Nepal and Maldives. In Nepal, particularly, it's been a strange situation because Nepal has sort of changed fairly rapidly. It's from being a monarchy to almost a fully communist tilt. So the change in Nepal has been, the seeds might have been planted over the decades, but the change has been fairly quick. And what do you see? How has India dealt with that change, you think? And what opportunities do you guys think that there is for India to sort of better salvage its relationship with Nepal?
So for Nepal, I mean, as you said, there have been a lot of transitions over, let's say, the last 15 years. Uh, so the previous government was friendly towards India. It did a sort of balancing between. Now what with the neighborhood, the interesting part was, see, before we were the resident power in the we call it the Indian Ocean region, but now we are no longer the only game in town. So we can't take for granted that even if we don't help them out with any kind of assistance or stuff, like they will always be beholden to Indian interests. And we cannot have the big brother attitude that many times India has in the past dictated, not I wouldn't say dictated terms, but told them what's best in their interest. So what we need to do is, like, we need to be patient, listen to their concerns, but also draw red lines. Like, for example, you have to tell your neighbors that you cannot build a military base, a Chinese military base in your neighborhood. So be firm with your security concerns, but then also be patient to listen to their concerns and avoid the big brother attitude. Now, coming to Nepal, it's interesting. Like, Prime Minister Oli has been pro China and, like, I mean, covertly anti India to say. But the thing people forget is he's in a alliance with the other communist party headed by the former Maoist Prachanda. Now, Prachanda has good contacts in New Delhi, and it was interesting that recently he was given the red carpet welcome by Prime Minister. He met Prime Minister Modi, which is interesting for a coalition partner to meet Prime Minister Modi. So I believe that they have that, in India we have that famous 2.5 year आप कुर्सी पे बैठो फिर 2.5 साल के लिए मैं कुर्सी पे बैठूंगा.
Right.
So they have that interesting arrangement. So I think India is going all out to woo Prachanda, so that when Oli has to give up office in, let's say, maybe 1.5 or 2 years, uh, India can have a much smoother relationship with Prachanda. But there is not much we can do except increase our economic engagement, which we need to do. So the challenge is, like, we always promise a lot, but we never deliver due to, let's say, bureaucratic lethargy, inefficiency. So we need to, like as people say, like, put meat on the bones, right? Um we have, like, I'll give you an example. So I read an article where a policeman in Nepal said that when he joined the service, India had promised to build a new police station for that place in Nepal, and now he was close to retirement, and still that police station was, or that building wasn't built. Now what China does is they come in and they build it in rapid uh, um pace. So, like, they will be going to China a lot. So the challenge is, like, we have to show, like, as you know very well know, that China does debt trap diplomacy, where they entrap the nation with very high interest loans. Now the thing is, it's not simple that, like, let's say I'm giving a loan to you, Shambho. I cannot come and say, like, Shambho, don't take that loan from Kishore because you're going to get entrapped in the debt. I have to show that I am giving you a loan at a lower interest rate, because it's not simply saying that if you want to develop, I cannot tell that, hey, you don't go take the loan because it's for your good. So we have to show, I mean, we cannot match the Chinese investment dollar for dollar, but what we can do is we can at least do the some level of investment work with these nations to show there is an alternate to the debt trap. Because right now it's like, in the olden days we had that zamindar system where the poor farmer used to go to the zamindar and take the loan because there is no other option. So even if you tell the poor farmer, hey, don't go to them, like, he will say, like, who will give me the money for development? So same thing, like, you have to step up our execution work, which has been lacking a lot. And even under the current government, I mean, it hasn't improved. So that is a challenge, like, where we have to speed up execution of our projects to show an alternate to the Chinese model. So when they have a separate option, they will push back more at China, because they have two options. If you have only one option, you're going to take it, because the political party is not going to think, okay, in 30 years how am I going to pay up the loan, because they might not be in power. Now what all this, see, like, we do balancing between US and Russia. So these small nations, they do balancing between India and China. So they will try to extract the best deal from both. So it's not like we're going to eliminate China, but we just have to make sure that we don't fall behind, that it tilts way towards China. So we just have to, I mean, and small nations are going to play us against China for sure. There's no doubt about it. But we just have to strike that right balance, that we do enough that they don't go wholly towards China, but there is a healthy competition between both.
Right. And China is is an interesting one because I was in New Zealand for a little bit and I saw what they're doing there, and you can see what China is doing in all these different countries, but the countries don't seem to be learning from it. Every year there's like a new country that's accepting these loans, and they're looking at what's happening in Pakistan, they're looking at what's happening in Sri Lanka, but they continue to take these loans. Is this just sheer short-sightedness on the part of the government, or is it something that we're missing? Kishore, I'll let you take this one.
Uh, this is actually a tough one to answer because what these countries have is some kind of a blemished record in one arena or the other. For example, Sri Lanka had a blemished record in terms of human rights record. And when had to rebuild the country, the West gave up on him, and India being India, went slow. And Mahinda had an election to fight within the next 2.5 to 3 years, and he could not afford to showcase a country in ruins to the people to win back again. And he wanted quick money to invest, and at the same time he was trying to continue his own political legacy in terms of nurturing his own dynasty, the Rajapaksa family. So when what he got from the Chinese was unquestioned loans, and also cases where his short-sightedness of having an airport in Hambantota, having a port out there, although they were not economically feasible, Chinese were quick to grab them. And I think it had more to do with an emotional connection that Rajapaksa had of trying to have something for his own domestic constituency, and that is where Sri Lanka the whole spiral started. But then, just to bring the Nepal example and contrast it with Sri Lanka, there were reports about a month and a half ago, where India had built new homes in the northern territories in and around Jaffna, which ended up being significantly cheaper than what the Chinese had quoted initially, and India also built them in record time. So
Yeah.
in some cases we have won the battle, so to speak, but more or less the balance is still tilted towards the Chinese. We still have a lot of catching up to do. Now these are with respect to the emerging nations, so to speak. But when it comes to countries like Australia or New Zealand, they actually they actually are in fact ideal case studies for your PhD. So if you really want to understand why a Western democracy like Australia or New Zealand started tilting so heavily towards China, it actually speaks a lot about how the IMF and the World Bank in itself is working, and how even a Western democracy finds it difficult to get loans, or does not, at times it does not overlook some of the failures when it comes to uh, population resettlement and stuff like that. So a coal mine that is coming up somewhere near Darwin in Australia will invariably force the local population to shift elsewhere. And IMF and World Bank may actually find it tough to bend some of the rules to finance these projects. And these are the exact opportunities that China is actually
Yeah.
looking out for. and they go and tell to hell with all these
Yeah.
rules are meant to be broken. We don't mind financing you. And you know what, China has a way of sweet talking all of this. What they do is not only do they finance the coal project, but they also get a second project in terms of building houses for the displaced people. So China ends up being in a win-win situation, and for
Sorry, go ahead.
So sorry, go ahead, Kishore. Like I wanted to add to Kishore's
okay. So I'll quickly wrap it up. So for somebody in Australia, the local politician out there, I mean, generally in the Western world, how it works is you go back to your voters and showcase the number of jobs that you brought and the kind of development that you brought to your constituency. So these invariably help you if you are a politician out there. And I think these were the situations and the context in which Australia found itself in, whether it liked it or not. And China actually preyed on such nations all over.
Yeah, I'll let you come in, Mohal, just a second. But I just wanted to add in a little word as well, because it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I used to see with countries like Australia, with countries like New Zealand, there's that economic aspect to it as well. Like with New Zealand, China has this free trade agreement where uh, overwhelmingly the country that benefits from it is at the end of the day China rather than New Zealand, because New Zealand's in a situation now, because of this free trade agreement, New Zealand's in a situation now where, yes, I mean, they're benefiting in the short run, where they're sending like 80 to 85% of their dairy produce, which is their biggest industry. They're sending that to China. They're sending most of their milk to China right now, but they're in a situation right now where they're solely dependent on China. They've unfortunately in a situation where they put all of their eggs in one basket. So if tomorrow China decides, because now China has them by the scruff of their neck. If tomorrow China decides, okay, this is what I want you to do. If you say no, we're going to stop taking your milk, because we're China, we do what we want. And if China does that, then New Zealand is screwed. And so New Zealand is having to make these concessions in their policy of different kinds, where Chinese students, like if you're a foreign student going to study in New Zealand, you have to take this IELTS test or whatever, that English proficiency test. But if you're a Chinese student, you don't need to take that. So you have universities in New Zealand teaching in English, where you have Chinese students who don't speak a lick of English. And that's policy. That's allowed. And Chinese people are allowed to buy houses in New Zealand, and there's no like limits on it generally. So what is happening is they're coming in and they're buying up property where people are bidding on houses. So let's say New Zealanders are trying to buy a house in the capital, Auckland, but they can't buy it because Chinese investors are coming in and they're outbidding the New Zealanders by at least $200,000, at least. So now New Zealanders that live in New Zealand have been priced out of buying houses in Auckland. And it's China investing heavily in real estate in New Zealand. Now, this year, New Zealand's formulating laws where they're saying, okay, foreigners can buy only this much and so on and so forth. But already that ship has sailed to an extent where New Zealand could get that power back. So these things are tricky, what China is doing. And I feel like countries for some reason don't see it, or again, like, it's about short-term benefits. It's about politicians just being like, this is going to help me right now, and then the guy that comes after me will have to deal with the fallout.
So same with, I would say, Australia and even the West Coast in US, a lot of cash buyers, because people are worried about the stability of the Chinese economy. So many of the rich people are trying to push money out to buy properties. So it's a problem everywhere. So I know we talked a lot of topics. I wanted to get in on some of the topics. So one was like, let me give the example of Sri Lanka, which Kishore said. So interestingly, it was been reported that the port deal was offered to India first. India did a feasibility study and said, you know what, this is not going to be viable. So why invest money? But China doesn't care. Like, it just wants to get a foothold in this
Mm.
nation. So it went ahead and invested. So that's a challenge where do you need to invest in a money losing project to keep the Chinese out, or do you really want to invest in the country? So the funny part is like Hambantota, the port in Sri Lanka, which Rajapaksa developed, it's like an empty port, barely anything comes in. So to get the debt off, they did a equity swap where China controls, I believe, like 70% of the land. So what we had to do is to keep a watch over the Chinese. The airport next door, which is supposedly called the world's most emptiest airport because no flights take on or take off, we invested 300 million in a world's emptiest airport because we want to keep an eye out of what the Chinese are doing at the port. So there
Right.
are unintended consequences. Secondly, many countries, including in Africa, there were their dictatorships. Like, they just welcome Chinese investment because they don't get any questions asked by IMF, as Kishor said. So China must be in certain cases. I mean, I don't have proof, but like greasing the palms of the local strongmen just to get in. But it doesn't come with investment. See, now many of these countries, they say like, okay, we'll get Chinese investment, so growth will occur. They get this fancy new railroads and highways, but there's no way they can pay for it, so it's a debt trap. But interestingly, it's not China employs the local people to work on these projects. It's China brings their own people from China. So there is
Mm.
more resentment from the local people that, hey, we were supposed to get the jobs, but it's all the Chinese workers coming in. So we are not, in the end, we might get a shiny new toy, but we are not getting any employment out of it. And coming to the New Zealand and Australia question, see, like, interestingly, the only Western country, or let's say a first world country, which hadn't had a recession in the last 25 years, across the dot-com bubble, across 9/11, and across the global recession, has been Australia. Why? Because of interdependency with China. So they are the largest trading partner. So now a day of reckoning, many people said is going to come where it's going to decide between its security interest and its economic interest. Now you can't have both. So just last year they passed some new espionage laws where if you're working for the Chinese government or foreign agent, then you have to register yourself as a foreign agent. So there has been a lot of, I can send you countless articles on deep penetration in the Chinese system by think tanks, by even members of parliament who are supposedly members of Chinese Communist Party when they were born in China and raised in China. There are
Mm.
like people who give benefits or gave like this first class trips to China to wine and dine them so that they can further China's policy. So there is a large level penetration in even in the political system of Australia and New Zealand. But it's, as I said, you one day you have to choose whether you the security aspect is ways higher or the economic. It's right now there's a good healthy discussion on which way to lean, because some people, like, if you ask the trader, he's going to go with the economic side, and if you ask the security analyst, he's going to go with the security part of it. So that's
Right.
the strategic challenge with China, like all across the world.
Right. And how has India generally done in dealing with China over the past, let's say, 4 or 5 years? And there was that Doklam issue. People have been. There was also recently Modi had a meeting with Xi Jinping, where for some reason Modi was really criticized as why is he going and meeting Xi Jinping? And generally speaking, what do you guys think has been India's sort of, how successful has India been in dealing with China, or how have they dealt with China in general? And where do you see the opportunity for improving the way they've dealt with China? So I'll let Kishore take this one first.
Yeah, I think there are still multiple angles to be considered here. One is primarily security, which we keep listening to a lot, simply about Sri Lanka, about the string of pearls in the Indian Ocean region, about Doklam, and also the repeated incursions across the line of actual control in the Ladakh area. But for that, we continue to have when it comes to Ladakh and the undemarcated boundary, we continue to have the framework that we had from the past 20 years or 15 years, ever since Vajpayee started that framework. And that in itself is going on quite well without any major hiccups. So until that is resolved, you will continue to hear these repeated incursions happening during the summer, whenever the snow melts and the weather is hospitable enough for the soldiers to move around. So I think those again, as we mentioned in the beginning, we need to go beyond the individual events happening and try to look at the pattern behind it. I think until and unless the border is finalized and approved and ratified, we will continue seeing such incursions and intrusions. Uh, be that as it may, I am more interested in the economic angle in the India-China relationship. The trade deficit in itself continues to be unsolved.
Mm,
India continues to bleed heavily when it comes to buying more from China
mm.
than
Yeah,
able
That's
to
a
50
big
billion
one.
sell
trade
more to
deficit.
Mm,
China. So that is something that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible. I mean, if you are a road accident victim, the first 2 3 hours is the key. You need to get to the hospital immediately. There's no point in going to the hospital 3 hours or 4 hours after you have bled massively.
mm.
So I think India is in a similar situation when it comes to a lopsided trade deficit. Time is running out, and India will have to do something majorly in that regard. Mind you, India has been trying, but all along, all it gets from the other end is a massive wall of refusal and denial,
Mm.
where China does not give you any permission whatsoever, even to allow to have your software services or your BPO services to work there. China flatly refuses. So that's the kind of lopsided discussions we keep having. But again, we have to keep trying and hope we get to resolve it sooner than later.
Do you think that with China's rise and with China becoming more of a military economic power in the world, that has forced some of the countries in the West or some of the first world countries, as Mohal was saying, to sort of find some camaraderie with India or sort of find some common ground with India and be like, okay, China's getting to a position where this is an expansionist country, and we need to sort of to check it, we need to create a counterbalance, and India can be that counterbalance. And do you see that this could be an opportunity for India to sort of develop a better relationship, or leverage this threat that China has with these Western countries and develop a better relationship with them, get some things that they want? Is Do you see that as something that the Western countries are actively looking at, or are they not? And do you see that India is actually, there are opportunities for India, but do you think that India is actually poised or well positioned enough to be able to uh, utilize those opportunities properly? So I'll
So,
let Mohal start. Yeah, go ahead.
Go,
So
Mohan.
yeah, I mean, if you see the drift towards US over the past few years, and that's the result of the China becoming more hegemonic and trying to dictate terms to the rest of the world. So, like, I mean, the Quad is a perfect example where all the countries like Japan, India, US, and Australia, they're trying to form. I mean, it's not an alliance; it's just like a grouping for now. They're trying to form together. So actually, it was funny. Like former Foreign Secretary and National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon said, like India should thank China for all its new friends. I mean, we have been always. I mean, the drift has been accelerating as the days go by because everybody
Mhm.
understands this is a strategic challenge for all the countries around the world. And I forget, like, what was the second part of your question?
The second part of the question was that how well do you think India is actually poised to, or how much faith do you have in India to actually be able to, utilize this opportunity that China has presented, utilize this opportunity properly?
So, see, like during Doklam crisis, like on which I wrote like some time ago, like China constantly gave a volley of threats to us that okay, we are 5 times larger than you, so will you learn the lessons? You haven't learned the lessons of 62 war and stuff. So what we need to do is military strength is one thing, but also economic strength is like China became stronger once its economy grew.
Hmm.
So what we need to do is the challenge is like see we grow 7% on average for the last 25 years. If you're bad governance, you grow 6. If you go good governance, it's 8.
Hmm.
So our podcast is called India Rising because India's position in the world is rising.
Hmm.
That's why we call our podcast India Rising. Now the challenge is that so I'll come to the strategic autonomy and non-alignment later. So right now India has to grow consistently at 8 to 10%
Hmm.
to reduce the 5x difference with China, and it's going to reduce because we are growing faster than them. But it's going to take a long time to reduce the delta. So
Hmm.
let's say in the future the 5x is reduced to 2.5x, our economic position will be better, and we can talk to China at a similar or equal terms. What
Hmm.
happened is after the global recession, China started believing that this is a G2 world and we don't consider you our peer.
Hmm.
So they started like talking down to India more than what it did before. That it's a G2 world in their mind. It's only us and US and there's nobody else. Now coming to the alliance part, we have been drifting. Now like from independence, like our foreign policy has always been defined by like what we call it strategic autonomy. It is basically a legacy of the colonial rule that the British made decision for us. Now we want to be masters of our own. So but what happened is like some people like in let's say certain parties, I wouldn't want to name them, but they confuse strategic autonomy and non-alignment.
Hmm.
So non-alignment is like a derivative of strategic autonomy, but where they get confused is that let's say if you sign the recently Comcast agreement or the Lamoa agreement with US, that helps you to gain a lever or hedge against China, but you're not giving up your strategic autonomy. So India will not enter into any formal military alliance in the future. It's we will still have to stand up on our own legs. So we have to grow our economic power and military power, but we will try to hedge or what I call is soft balancing. So
Hmm.
what we do is like as like Professor TV Paul like in his article said, like India does lot of soft balancing because we balance with China, I mean with US and Russia. We balance, let's say, with Iran and Saudi Arabia. So we do a lot of soft balancing and
Hmm.
limited. We'll do limited hard balancing, but we'll never enter a formal military alliance. So if people are expecting that, that's not going to happen because I mean, from Nehru to Modi, like we always had strategic autonomy was the number one thing. And coming back to your previous question regarding the China policy, so what happened is like the after Doklam, like both India and China realized that like the temperature had risen too much and it wasn't working out for the relationship. So
Hmm.
they need to work out a new modus vivendi that how we talk. That's why Prime Minister Modi went to Wuhan to reset it. Now, does it mean that China will never transgress into India? No. Does it mean that China will stop bullying India? No. It is just like kind of a they called a timeout that okay, you know what, this is not working out. China has other challenges with North Korea, with US. So China said, okay, let's call a timeout with India for now. It doesn't mean that they will stop bullying India for sure, but it was just like a call of a timeout call. It's not like a reset as many people say. And even Prime Minister Modi has elections coming up, so it doesn't make it that to have another Doklam kind of
Hmm.
event. One important thing you said, what is different from this government versus previous government is, see, in this government, they stood behind the army in Doklam and stuff. But
Hmm.
compare that to the Depsang incursion in Ladakh in 2013. Then a minister in the previous government, I can't recall the name, like it was a Congress minister, he said that, oh, the incursion is nothing. It's like a acne on your face. I mean,
Hmm.
come on. I mean, that's like totally ridiculous. So that's the thing. So like what the military said, like that the military always stood firm with provocations with China in terms of incursions, but this time the political backing at the highest level was also there. Unlike
Hmm.
this last time example, when in the I've been in the Depsak or the Chumar incursion, they said like, oh, it's a acne on your face, like we don't need to worry about stuff. So that's the difference between the two governments, I would say.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the India Pakistan stuff as well because I wanna sort of talk about two things here. So the first thing was, there was supposed to be this meeting between India and Pakistan, which India cancelled at the last minute because of what happened in Kashmir with the three policemen. And eventually they came out with a statement, and the MEA basically said that, talking to Pakistan essentially is meaningless right now, which I couldn't agree more right now. And I also think that for I don't right now, at the very least, India is in a position where they don't necessarily need to talk to Pakistan, because India is on it's on its own path. It's on its way to sort of join the elite ranks of nations around the world. It's on its way to sort of more compete against China than against Pakistan. And Pakistan is in a position where they have a lot of external pressure on them right now, because the United States, which was their steadfast ally, is not so steadfast anymore. They're having trouble with getting the loan from the IMF, which I don't know, they probably might eventually, but they're having trouble with it right now. The Financial Action Task Force has notified them, put them on the gray list for terror financing. There's a lot of, and countries in Europe, EU, they've all been talking about how Pakistan needs to do a lot more to curb terror than it has been doing now. So more and more we see that Pakistan is being found out in sort of the world stage finally. So my question is, does India even bloody need to talk to Pakistan right now? So I'll let Kishore start.
Okay. So when the Modi government came to power, he started making all the right noises by inviting Nawaz Sharif,
Hmm.
and then within the first 1.5 year, you found him going to Lahore, to his ancestral hometown, and try to build some kind of a one-to-one relationship, hoping that things would eventually improve. But then again, I believe that all prime ministers have that right to decide the path that they want to take
Hmm.
with Pakistan, and Modi chose that new path, and it didn't work. Fair enough. I mean, we all
Hmm.
knew that it would not work, but again, full marks for trying. But be that as it may, the second part of Modi's tenure, Modi has simply ignored Pakistan
Yep.
ever since the SARC summit was called off in Pakistan, where actually countries like Maldives and Sri Lanka, they were not actually in favor of calling off the summit and point fingers at Pakistan. But India prevailed on all these countries to come along and join the bandwagon and try to put excessive pressure on Pakistan.
Hmm.
And after that, it has been a complete lull. There has been radio silence, so to speak, to whenever it comes with Pakistan. And that is where I think Pakistan started feeling the vacuum and the silence. And with the new establishment, probably with the army's approval,
Hmm.
Imran Khan again kind of chose to reply back to the cursory congratulatory note
Hmm.
by claiming to have resumption of dialogue, and that somehow uh, started going from step 1 to step 100
Hmm.
in no time. And by the time, within probably a week or a fortnight, you had enough noise being made about a foreign secretary and foreign minister level one-on-one dialogue. But then, be that as it may, uh, it's unlike the Korean situation. Things are not conducive right now to have that kind of a escalatory dialogue, escalatory talks to happen between India and Pakistan, simply because things have not changed, and Kashmir continues to remain the boiling pot as it was all along. And I think the Modi government is also biding its time in terms of utilizing the Indus water share that it wants to make use of. So as and when India Pakistan would talk, eventually they will have to at some point in time in the future. India would definitely want to have one extra leverage to talk with Pakistan, wherein all along Pakistan was used to utilizing the excess unused waters of Indus. And now India can simply build a dam and tell, hey, we are using our share of the water, even without renegotiating the Indus Water Treaty. And that alone would be sufficient to halt the Pakistani agricultural economy on its heels. So I think it is a multi-dimensional game that's being played both in Islamabad and in New Delhi right now, and India is solely focused on getting a little more leverage whenever they want to talk to Pakistan.
There's a good question here in the live chat. It's coming from MMPP, and they're asking there are more than 50 Islamic countries in the UN. Do you think they will keep up pressure on India, and do you think that they will unite sort of behind Pakistan if Pakistan faces more sort of isolation in the world? Do you think that's something that's possible?
I mean,
I'll let Mohal go with this one. Yeah.
I doubt like they will be standing because there is nothing to gain. With so in like the earlier days, there was like the show of solidarity between all the Muslim nations. But I mean, Saudi Arabia is a friend of Pakistan, so they would ride behind it. But also like within the Arab world, there is also the Shia, the Sunni split.
Mhm.
So I would doubt like all of them would support. Like yeah, I mean, few might support, but like let's say if you had to support accept the warm fuzzy feeling that okay you supported a fellow Muslim nation, there is no strategic benefit gained from Pakistan. It's not like you're going to Pakistan going to invest in your economy or you're going to improve trade with them. So there is no additional benefit. So there could be some proverbial like statements to be put out, but not nothing concrete beyond that.
Yeah, yeah. It's. Do you think that the countries that sort of globally that people are realizing that Pakistan has sort of been a double dealing state and it's coming more and more to the fore? And again, I want to make this point clear that when I'm talking about Pakistan, I'm not talking about an individual Pakistani person just living their life trying to earn a living. I'm talking about the government, the army establishment that formulates these bloody policies. So I'm talking about those people. And do you think that now that sort of people are realizing that Pakistan, the establishment is being more and more found out about being a double dealing establishment? And do you think that this realization that sort of the global community is having towards Pakistan, particularly the United States and EU, do you think that this is a flash in the pan because we've seen something like this before as well? Or do you think this is something that is more longer lasting?
Kishore, you want to go?
Yeah. I think we found that very example when Pakistan claimed to have delayed or stopped the FATF grey list issue when it came to that, where Pakistani observer he came out of the room. I think it was in Geneva, if I'm not mistaken, where he came out of the room and said that Pakistan had managed to thwart all attempts by India to add Pakistan to the FATF grey list, and there was actually one more day of deliberations left. And this kind of an arrogant statement coming from a diplomat at that stage late in the night, only to cater to his domestic audience in Islamabad and the prime time 9 p.m. news watchers in Pakistan, only to entertain them and only to convince them that Pakistan was safe. They actually made that mistake. And the next day, what happened? I mean, we all know countries like Turkey, China, they all
My cat
Yeah.
actually.
is feeling very frisky today. Go ahead.
So yeah, countries like Turkey and China, they found all this to be not amusing. and they India was in the right place at the right time the next morning, and India convinced both Turkey and China. See, this is the kind of statements being made by the Pakistanis, and they are not serious about combating terror for their own good, let alone uh, having peace in the region. So I think this kind of a double standard where the Pakistani establishment points at India for everything that happens, even within Pakistan. You have a school shooting, and within half an hour, even without any evidence, the defense minister or the foreign minister blames India and the Indian agency raw for it.
Raw.
Yeah.
So exactly, yeah. So I think this is the kind of half-baked attempts coming from Pakistan that the world is fed up of, and that is where more and more countries are not buying their version of the story, and India will have to continue doing the same over and over again. India should not get bored of doing this
Mm.
unless and until India kind of manages to keep Pakistan in its place, which
Mm.
is basically to have a safer South Asia region for everyone's benefit, without cross-border terrorism or without any other forms of terror bothering anybody in the region. So until that happens, until that situation is witnessed, India will have to continue playing the same game over and over again, trying to tell all the stakeholders in the region, including a country like Turkey, Saudi, Iran, or even China for that matter, and prevail upon them, convince upon them that these are the double standards coming out from the Pakistani establishment.
Yeah, and in relation to that, now to build on that, there's a good point here that is being made by Azad Hind. He's saying that a question for Mohal and Kishore is how will we handle the situation with sort of Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, given the fact that India is attempting to develop and has been developing a stronger relationship with each of these three countries. So it's a very, very difficult tightrope to walk. How has India done in walking this tightrope, and what would your recommendations be for the future?
I mean, we have done well. I mean, just take the example, like we have direct flights to Israel with a overflight over Saudi Arabia. I mean, nobody has allowed that. So we have walked the tightrope well. With Iran, like we have the Chabahar port being developed as a roundabout route to get into Afghanistan. So we have done a good job. You just have to deepen the ties. Also we have 7 million expatriates working in the Gulf. So it's not like you can choose to ignore the interest. We have huge energy demands which are going to be met by the Gulf countries. So I believe like we have been doing a good balance. That's like part of the soft balancing that India does with all nations around the world. It's like, it's funny, like we have good relations with almost everybody in the world except our biggest two neighbors.
I mean, that does that say more about India, or does that say more about the bloody two neighbors? You know?
I, I mean, and coming back to that the point of talks. So see, I have like a view that like see, no two countries have ever got around resolving the disputes without talking. Now, the place I differ with some of this, let's say the on the left bunch of people is okay. Let's have talks, but let's keep it to the NSA level. So the NSA, the National Security Advisors, have been meeting in third countries, so we
Hmm.
can continue to talk, which means that we don't have any dialogue, because dialogue is necessary to resolve conflicts, even though however deep they may be. But let's not give them this prime ministerial, this Sushma Swaraj external affairs minister, because that's the oxygen that Pakistanis are looking for. That's the oxygen publicity that they're looking for
Mhm.
to like politicize this for their own benefit. So as long as you talk on the side at a very low level, it's okay, but let's not do. I mean, the problem, as you say, and the other problem is, who do we talk to? I always have this funny people, like people ask me, do we talk to Pakistan? I said, yeah, we talk to Pakistan, but hey, you tell me, do we talk to Islamabad or do we talk to Rawalpindi?
Hmm.
Because the problem is, as you know, in Eisenhower in 1950s in USA said there's a military industrial complex which controls everything. So in Pakistan, it's the military, right? I mean, they own 12% of the land. They have 25 billion in assets. They have their hand in all the commercial businesses, be it insurance companies, bakeries, banks. So, and the thing is, if there's peace tomorrow with India, like people will question their existence, and why do you need such a big bloated budget to maintain yourself? Because now you're peace with India. So it's for in their personal interest to keep the pot boiling, so that they can grow fatter with their own, they can enrich themselves and also justify their large, and then they can call the foreign policy and defense shots in Pakistan. So
True. Okay.
I agree with your podcast yesterday that, I mean, it wasn't a very good idea to talk at, let's say, the political level. We can always talk at the secretary and the NSL level. That's what my opinion is.
Right, right. Okay. So really quickly, guys, if you're watching in the top chat right now, in the live chat right now, please start giving me your questions in the chat right now. So I'll make a list of your questions, and towards the last 10-15 minutes of the podcast, we will put them to Mohal and Kishore as well. So if you have any questions, foreign policy related questions to ask Mohal and Kishore, please start writing them down right now, and I will make sure to put them to Mohal and Kishore in the last 10-15 minutes. Okay, so coming to that was sort of our immediate neighborhood a little bit. I want to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about uh, our more extended neighborhood, which is the United States, the EU, Russia, and stuff like that. Putin's coming to India. What do you make of? Because Russia and India have always had a strong-ish connection and relationship, at least at the sort of foreign policy level. In the light of India or and the United States and India and EU getting better relations or making better relationships, at least Modi and Trump trying to reach out to each other a little bit more. What do you make of the relationship between India and Russia, going on to the future now? So I'll let Kishore start this one.
Okay, I think we are well past the stage where we actually kind of fight one against the other. Gone are the days when a Maldives would place India against Sri Lanka just to ensure that Sri Lanka would not trample on Maldives. Gone are the days when Sri Lanka would play Pakistan against India just to ensure that India would not trample Sri Lanka. So I think those days are gone. India again in the larger neighborhood. India should not worry that US is playing India against China or anybody else. I think those days are gone. Each country's relationship with any other country is simply for their own good, for their own bilateral relationship, and any derivative that you get out of it is then to be seen in a larger perspective of how it plays in the regional context, in the sub-regional context, and also in the global context. So, for example, we are jumping back questions here. When you said ties with Saudi, ties with Iran, ties with Israel, you don't see any of these countries coming back to you and complaining like school kids, telling, "Hey, you know what? You are dealing with them. We will not deal with you." I think every country understands that in a multipolar world that we live in today, those are the times that we live in today, post end of the Cold War. Every country will have to hedge its bets in a more balanced manner. Nobody wants to put all their eggs in one basket. Be it even the Western powers like in Australia or such countries. So similarly, India is playing the same kind of a game where it wants to balance out in terms of trade, in terms of growth, in terms of strategic independence in the region, ensuring that uh, nobody tramples on them in the Indian Ocean region or also in the South Asia region across the Himalayas or even with Pakistan. So I think whoever would come to India's help in these regards, India would welcome them. irrespective of whether they are not friendly with your other friends. India believes that they can talk their way through all this, especially when it comes to U.S. Russia or U.S. China relationship. So I think that is a tightrope walk that India is doing right now, and also countries like Russia, countries like US, they actually understand the situation that a country like India is in. So when they come up with a legislation, they also understand that it would adversely affect some of their own allies, some of their own friendly nations. So they are quick to come up with some kind of exceptions or waivers, so to speak, in terms of CATSA legislation. So I think when they come across to Delhi for a one-to-one talk, they already come well prepared with an exception, telling, okay, we are willing to give you an exception, we are willing to give you a waiver, but then probably while giving that, they expect a little more. And again, India would be happy to consider that something more. But I think that is the kind of mature relationships that India is witnessing with US, with Russia. And again, Russia, as India grows closer to the US, Russia is growing closer to Pakistan. So again,
And
Putin
China.
has landed in yeah, with China as well. Putin has landed in New Delhi just a few hours ago, and I'm sure Modi or even Sushma Swaraj or whoever would talk with Putin would bring all that up for discussion across the table. But I'm pretty sure that they would bring out their concerns of the military exercises that Pakistan and Russia has, so on and so forth. And there are a few clear red lines that India would never want Russia to cross. For example, there were a few photo journalistic reports last year of Russia having military exercises with Pakistan in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And that actually enraged South Bloc to no end. But then Moscow was quick to clarification, telling that this did not happen in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, but elsewhere within Pakistan, which India was okay with. So I think that is the kind of maturity that everybody is displaying.
Okay, so before I take questions from the audience, I want to ask one more question, which I've always been interested in, and I want to get you guys' opinions on it. And people talk a lot about soft power and how American soft power went such a long way in winning the Cold War. And I've always felt that if there's one country that can possibly match and even surpass the United States in terms of soft power, it's India. I don't really see any other country that has the sort of soft power resources available so freely and so readily other than India. And usually, generally speaking, India has been woefully bad at promoting its soft power or propagating its soft power throughout the world. I think it's improved in a way, particularly with the way that you see the way Prime Minister Modi has advertised and promoted an International Yoga Day. That's been a success in my opinion, even though they've taken the whole line and yoga has nothing to do with Indian culture or whatever. I understand why they're doing it, because they're trying to promote it right now in different countries that are not Hindu countries. So I understand that, but they've done well with that. And just the success of International Yoga Day shows you that there's so much bloody potential that India has in terms of soft power of influencing countries, influencing policy. Even these things can become so important, like we've seen from the American example, how important these things can be. So how important do you think soft power is, or do you think that's the importance of soft power is overstated usually? And what do you think India's potential is in terms of utilizing its soft power to its benefit to assert itself more in the world? And how can it go about doing it better? So I'll let Mohal start this one, and I want Kishore to come in as well.
So, like, see, every country requires a combination of soft and hard power. Now, this is where I think China has been lacking in terms of soft power. They just trying like gray zone coercion, coercing, bullying everybody to bend to their ways. That's why there's a lot of pushback from countries, be it in Southeast Asia, the West, everything. So India, we do have a lot of potential, as you rightly mentioned. There was a lot of blowback game, Modi ji paisa bigad rahe with International Yoga Day, but the goal was to promote the soft power of India.
Yep.
Now, I mean, if you talk about like Bollywood movies, right? Songs. I mean, if you go to like Central Asia, like Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, they know the Bollywood movies there. It's popular in Southeast Asia, Japan. Actually, Dabang, I mean, even that one made like what 300 crores in China, right? Just China.
Wow.
So there is a lot of potential for soft power. Like even recently, like in China, there was a movie where there were some cancer patients who were dying, and the way they saved the patients was getting the medicines from India. So that's kind of like soft power. Like in China, like medicine procurement of medicine is a very big problem. So India could like improve relations. I mean, it's not going to take away all the issues away from the table, but like you could promote soft power. So there is a lot of potential for soft power, and I think glow as your strength grows on the world stage, we will see a more projection of soft power. And see, like India has, it's not like China where you rub your all your neighbors the wrong way. India has never been an what do you call an expansionist power, like where
Or
you
an
try to
aggressive
expand.
power, yeah.
Yeah, aggressive, hard-nosed power. Like we have like good cordial relations, and that's been a part of our culture and philosophy, that we are like, I mean, except maybe one case where the Cholas they invaded maybe Southeast Asia. We have never invaded any other country throughout our
Hmm.
like 10,000 years of history or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
So there is a lot of potential for sure for soft power, and that will help build all these relationships a lot. I mean, you do require some limited hard power, but you can buy all the tanks and planes in the world. But if you don't have soft power, hard power is useless. You require both, but the more essential is the soft power plus some kind of hard power. But hard power by itself, as you see in China's case right now, it's not very useful.
Hmm. 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 What do you think, Kishore?
Yeah, I think soft power is an interesting dimension to look at. More than what we Indians think, or more than what the outsiders think. I think it's more important to see what our friends think about the Indian soft power.
Hmm.
And I would like to give you an example of the Singaporean deputy prime minister, who is actually of Indian descent, Indian origin, and he was the first person to kind of to come and tell it on our face. Thank God you are now open for business, and thank God you now realize that you have to go grab your place in the world. So I mean that's what friends are for. If they can't come and tell it on your face, then you better not have those friends. So I think those are the kind of statements that actually pep you up occasionally.
Hmm.
I remember vividly when the deputy prime minister of Singapore, he came to a Niti Aayog symposium in New Delhi, and he kind of explained that, hey, we have been waiting all along, and we were waiting for you to come along, and thank God you have come now. And that's the kind of patience that the others have displayed all along. So I think we need to really take it to the next level.
Hmm.
Yoga was a good unexpected success. Nobody thought that we could get it from yoga. People thought maybe we would have to we would have to give Bollywood a more governmental sanction. But then yoga actually did the trick. So much so that even as you said, the non-Hindu countries are also embracing it to no end. I think we just have to continue whatever we are doing.
Right, right. Okay, so let me take a couple of questions from the people watching right now. So this is something that we already touched on a little bit, but Jishnu K is asking: is Russia's good improving relationship with Pakistan a concern for India, given the fact that we have a deep relationship with them as well, and that we are also heavily using Russian arms. So is Russia's good relationship or improving relationship with Pakistan a major concern for India? So Kishore already touched on that a little bit. So I'll let Mohal answer this one.
So, I mean, just quick answer. I would be, let's say, concerned, but I wouldn't be having sleepless nights because, see, the same problem exists with India. The relationship with Russia is mostly what hydrocarbons and defense. Now, let's say Russia is doing the same thing as we do. It's also balancing, right? We balance between Russia and US. They say, okay, if India you go closer to US, we'll balance without. So it's a natural strategy. But I wouldn't be having sleepless nights. I mean, how will Pakistan deepen the relationship? What's there? I mean, maybe they can sell their arms, but Pakistan right now has no money to buy those arms. So, like, I mean, there's not much to be. I wouldn't get too worried about it.
Yeah. Okay. Bharat Ved Prakash is asking. Again, we touched on this a little bit, so just a quick answer. How do you see the relationship of India with Nepal, or how do you see India salvaging its relationship with Nepal going forward now that there is a communist government in place and there's a lot of Chinese influence in Nepal? So, who wants to take this one?
I mean, I'll just say, like, as I said before, like, India is wooing Prachanda. So probably after 2.5 years, when Oli has to give up the power, if that happens, because in India we have seen, like, after 2.5 years, the guy in power says, "Oh, many utra kursi se, tum karna hai, ukhad lo." So I think watch out for Prachanda. Delhi government, I think they practically rolled out the red carpet. Kishore, correct me if I'm wrong. For Prachanda, I think they are trying to woo him. Say, okay, at least we'll try to get through these 2.5 difficult years with Oli, and that by that time maybe we will have some kind of semblance of balance between India and China. I mean, Kishore, if you want to add anything.
No, I think you touched all the point. I think India will just have to bide its time and just wait for the right opportunity, just like how it opened up in Maldives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other than that, I think there is no point in going and cribbing in Kathmandu, telling drop
Yeah.
China and take us as a partner for all your projects. That is
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Yeah, we have to deliver. As I said before, another thing is, see, the blockade that we did in 2015 was one of the worst decisions like we could have ever taken, because what that happened is it alienated the common Nepali folk, because there's always the big brother syndrome. There's always some kind of resentment with India. Now what it happened is the communist parties, they tapped into it and they won power, because they said, like, hey, look, India is blocking all the fuel and food supplies to us. So what we need to do is we need to use our statecraft in a manner where we don't punish the common folk like we did in Maldives. Like, we didn't like say, okay, we are going to ban all exports to Maldives or imports from Maldives, but we quietly use our levers in the background to
Mm.
get the desired result in the end without having to use hard power or military intervention. So we try to use something without alienating the common folk. I think that's one of the big lessons that this government and, let's say, whoever comes back to power in 2019 need to take, that let's not alienate the common folk but use other levers like economic levers to change. I mean, that's soft power, right? I mean,
Mm.
like, what do you call as soft power is,
Yep.
what a soft power definition is, to influence behavior without using coercive or bullying methods like that, like what China does.
Yep. Yep. So Anant Venkatesh is asking, and let me rephrase kind of this question because it's an interesting question. I don't know if you guys necessarily talk about it or even have an opinion on it, but let me ask it regardless. Do you see in the long term future of the world a united Pakistan, or do you see that in the sort of medium term or in the longer term, do you see Pakistan sort of disintegrating into its constituent parts? Like you have Punjab and you have Balochistan and you have sort of the Pakhtunistan being absorbed into Afghanistan and stuff like that. Do you see that as a realistic possibility in the medium term or the long term or not? So I'll let Kishore start, and then Mohal can chime in as well.
Can you quickly repeat the question?
Sure,
Sorry, I
sure,
can hear
sure.
you.
No, no worries. So the question was that do you see Pakistan disintegrating into sort of its constituent parts, into like Punjab separate and then Balochistan separate, and then Pakhtunistan getting absorbed back into Afghanistan, whatever the case may be. Do you see that as a realistic possibility in the medium to long run?
Yes, I think nobody can say that for certainty, but I think it is a definite possibility with a fair chance in isolation if you look at it. And another interesting point there, you have Sindh, you have Balochistan, and you also have the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, who given left by themselves, they would actually want to have a pro-India policy. They would actually want to they would actually want to be with India in friendly terms. So I think that is something that India would be really
Do you
keen to.
actually feel that? Do you actually think that though? Because sorry to cut you off, but do you actually think that though? Because we hoped that was what would going to happen with Bangladesh, but we dropped the ball a little bit on that, and then Bangladesh sort of had its own thing in mind. Do you think that a Bangladesh-like situation will happen with Balochistan as well?
You mean minus the Indian intervention?
Minus the Indian intervention, just like the sort of relationship that Bangladesh and India had for a while. Now it's improving, where Bangladesh is helping India with counterterrorism efforts and stuff. But generally speaking, the relationship isn't rosy, and wasn't rosy, at least to say. And some people have been saying that if and when Balochistan becomes a separate entity, the relationship between Balochistan and India will be quite good. But do you see it going down the Bangladesh route or not?
I think that is a relevant danger to factor in, especially given the radicalization that we keep
Yep.
seeing not only within Balochistan, Quetta, but also even in Karachi. I mean,
Hmm.
the city is notorious for its underworld and crime, and wherever you have underworld and mafia and heavy criminal activities, radicalization can creep in very quickly. So I think that is a problem that we will really have to factor in. But I think in the long run, you might have a few hiccups here and there, but in the long run, it would definitely be a rosy relationship for India.
Okay. What about you, Mohal? What do you think?
So, see, like, I mean, there's always a possibility. It's very hard to say whether like Pakistan might break up into its constituent. Like, I mean, as you know, like the most of the power is in Punjab, right? That's where all the political power is concentrated. So there's always resentment within the other
Hmm.
regions. And I think you had like Senseji on like the Gilgit Baltistan episode, right? So
Sanjay,
like
yep.
he also saying, sorry. So he also mentioned that a lot of resentment towards Pakistan. So there is no knowing, it's like a sort of almost drifting towards a failed state. But the interesting thing is, see, like for India and many other countries, it was a nation from like centuries ago or thousands of years. Now Pakistan is a new construct where the only sense of identity they have is probably like the anti-India feeling. So there is
Hmm.
not something which binds them together as a nation, probably except the antagonism towards India. And like that
Hmm.
also, as you mentioned rightly, it's not between the common folk of Pakistan, it's mostly the military terrorist industrial complex. So there could be a disintegration of Pakistan, but it's very hard to say like what
When?
happens in the long.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kishore.
just one point
Sure.
before we end this. I think we should actually consider balkanization of Pakistan as a more possible scenario
Hmm.
than just
Yeah.
one part of it splitting away. I
Hmm.
think all three or all four splitting and going their ways would be a far more possible scenario
Hmm.
than just one part going its own way. And there are enough disturbances in each of these parts. Baloch have their own problem.
Hmm.
Sindh, you have the MQM having its own narrative being spun in Sindh. But then, more importantly, you also had the Pashtun Long March, which happened
Hmm.
last year, when Pashtuns of all people had a peaceful march from
How about
Peshawar
that?
all the way to to Islamabad, and that actually did not gather so much of worldwide attention.
That's true.
Pashtuns were never, Pashtuns are the more, they are the ones who would pick up a sword or a weapon even before they talk something. And long march of that nature for such a long time, again, that uh, kind of surprised everybody. So I think there is enough discontent under the surface, and
Even in
if and
Kashmir,
when
you
you
know,
really
when we sorry, when I was talking to Sengeji, even in sort of Pakistan occupied Kashmir, you can see that the people thought that okay, we're going to separate from this devil India, we're going to go into the Holy Land, and when you actually go and join the Holy Land, it's not what it was cut out to be. You know,
right,
you was promised this wonderful life and this and that, but in reality, all that is happening is that you're basically cattle that Punjab is
mhm,
using to extract dairy. You're basically just that. You're basically just farmland. You're basically just a resource, and you're basically just cattle at the end of the day. So there's a immense amount of discontent among the Kashmiri people that have been occupied by Pakistan as well. The only problem of from there also is that now that they've created such a huff and puff and be like, oh, we want to leave India and this and that, and now they've joined, now in Pakistan they're realizing that the situation is far worse, but because of all that huff and puff they initially created, they're having a lot of trouble, at least some of them, to accept that they were actually much better off for India.
Yeah, I mean, also, I mean, if it led as a balkanization of Pakistan, it's also has dangerous security implications because we don't know. Like, we never had a. I mean, maybe the USSR was a country where the nuclear weapons were there and it got split up eventually, but like they were all transferred to the Russia. But you never know. There could be. So I mean, I don't know if it might be a good thing for us in the long run because there could be some unintended consequences of a total breakup of Pakistan.
I I
mind you,
think
actually,
I think
Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal.
yeah.
You may not be 100% sure that
Yeah,
Baloch would want to give up
yeah.
their nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, that's gonna be a big one. But I think eventually that if the state does, break up into like balkanization, like Kishore was mentioning that term, I think it could be a good thing because because again, apart from that anti-India, and apart from that, oh, we're an Islamic country, apart from that sentiment, there's really nothing that gives them a sense of identity. Like if
Yeah,
you go talk to
exactly.
Pakistanis, they don't. The only sense of identity that they have is Islam, and that they're this anti-India country. And other than that, what is their identity? So half of them think they're Arabs, just like Bangladeshis, which is the funniest thing in the world to me. When Bangladeshis tell me that they're descendants of Arabs, I'm like, "Arey rehne do mandal bhai." So anyway, the issue there, that's the issue, that once that balkanization happens, there's going to be a search for identity, and that search for identity can take you nowhere else but to India. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to become part of India or anything like that, but I'm saying that there's going to be that discovery that without this anti-India sentiment and without this hyper-Islamization, essentially they're Indians. Not that they're going to become Indians, but there's going to be that reconciliation at the very least with sort of their indigenous past is what I think is quite likely to happen if such balkanization happens. And I'd like to think what you guys think of that.
I'll let Kishore go.
Okay.
I think people to people contact would
Yes.
be the key in that regard, as
Yes.
and when that happens, and the Hindi connection with the Gujaratis or the Kutch people, or the
Yes.
Baloch connection with again Hindi and the Gujaratis. And mind you, there is a small section of people in Baloch who actually speak a Dravidian language. So I think these are the small people-to-people connections that can easily be leveraged, in addition to the political leanings of the major political parties that we see in Quetta or in Karachi or in Peshawar. Peshawar again, you would find a more likening to go assimilate with Afghanistan. So as and when that happens,
Mhm.
Afghanistan would continue to have a pro-India policy. So I think Peshawar would be all sorted out, but Karachi and Quetta would have to be more people-to-people contact.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up as well on a sort of hopeful note. Again, I want to thank everybody who has joined us live and watched us. And submitted your questions. I hope I was able to take quite a few of them. I also want to thank Mohal and Kishore for coming on, and I also want to wish them all the very best for their show, guys. If you want to go check it out, it's a very interesting format that they've picked up. It's a very interesting area that they talk about foreign policy that there's not a lot of good information out there available. Go check out their podcast. It's on YouTube as well. It's called India Rising. I've listened to a couple of episodes and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So I would recommend that you guys go check it out. Again, if you enjoy what we do here on the Sham Sharma Show, you can subscribe to my channel as well. I will let Mohal and Kishore in that order have the last word.
So, like, just one more point to add. Like, so at India Rising, we cover not only foreign policy but also try to cover a little bit of defense
Okay.
and defense, because that's what our talk is about: strategic affairs. So, in the strategic affairs, we try to cover both foreign policy and defense. So, in closing, just want to say, like we do have a lot of challenges, but some one concern I see is that, like, say in India, we have too much obsession, especially in the Delhi TV studios,
Mm.
with Pakistan. But
Mm.
that is not a major strategic challenge. It's actually China. So I
Absolutely
compare, like,
right.
like, see, like Pakistan is like, I mean, if I give a example, like, see, Pakistan is like the like a rash on your skin, right? So it will flare up from time to time suddenly and unexpectedly when it least expected, but you can control it or manage it to a large extent. It's not going to kill you. But
Mm.
China is that slow moving cancer which is going to eat you from inside alive and is going to eventually kill you one day. So we need to be cognizant that if somebody asks me what are the biggest two challenges for India, I would say China in China and not China in Pakistan, because
Mm.
Pakistan you can manage to a certain extent, but China is the thing which is going to slowly eventually be a challenge. And for China, I mean, interestingly, in 20 years they will have the same demographics as Japan
Mm.
today. So it's going to grow old because of the legacy of the one child policy. So they are in a very big rush that they have to consolidate their position as the number one power in the world in the next 20 years. So we have to be very careful, like, how do we meet the challenges from China over the next 20 years? They don't get such a march ahead. That's where all the economic part is, like, we have to grow our
Yep.
economic power, grow at 8 to 10%, and your soft power or other powers will automatically flow out of it. So that's
Right.
all for the challenges ahead.
Okay. Kishore, I'll let you have the final word as well.
Okay, so yeah, again, two parts to it. One is you have to play China on China. China actually had a bide your time policy all
Yep.
along, but when its time came, it started flexing its muscles. I think India will have to do the same thing. India will have to bide its time under the surface, ensuring that it grows well enough to question and even challenge China whenever the right opportune moment comes its way. But India will also have to think bigger. India will just have to stop its China obsession beyond a point. India will have to champion uh, democracy in the non-Western world, so to speak. India will have to provide solutions to the second other half of the global population, like Aadhaar or successfully
Mm.
conducting elections without any major troubles. So India can provide that scalable solutions to countries around the world, like say conducting elections in Africa without the rule of law being curtailed, and ensuring that Africa continues to be democratically stronger.
Mm.
Similarly, India will also have to look at providing an Aadhaar-like solution to all these current countries who are just coming out of the middle, the lower class, lower income group, lower income category to a middle income category country, and that is where governance would be a big challenge for those countries. And if India can transfer their low-cost solution to these countries, they will kind of be indebted to you, and they will kind of tag along with you whenever the moment comes. So I think India will also have to uh, play along with China in one aspect, but also and not forget that its rightful place in the high table
Hmm.
will have to be considered seriously.
Okay. All right. Well, fantastic, guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Thank you to the people watching in the live chat as well. I will provide the link to India Rising YouTube channel as well. Some people asking for the link. I'll provide that in the description to this video as well in a second. Make sure to go check it out. Make sure to go subscribe to their channel. I want to thank both of these guys for coming on and for doing the fantastic work that they're already doing and to continue to keep doing it. Again, if you guys want to subscribe to the Sham Sharma Show, you can do it down below. If you want to subscribe or if you want to support on Patreon, you can go ahead and do that. And I'll provide that link to that as well. Thank you again to everybody for joining me. I'll see you for the next one. And until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'll see you guys soon.